Carroll, who's part of the Principal Wellbeing Project, being supervised by Paul and myself, and she's doing the qualitative PhD. So we've got Marcus doing the quant one, Guy's doing the qualitative one, and I will let you introduce yourself because that's part of the whole thing, and take us through the project to date.
Okay, hi, I'm Diane Carroll. So what I want to do is give a little bit of introduction, go through some background of what has driven my studied research to date, the lit review, the framework that I'm going to use going forward, my progress to date, and my plans of carrying on through that. So I have had over 20 years experience within the education systems in 2 states of Australia, in both primary, secondary, large, small, and most currently in independent college in Tasmania. So I've seen most categories of schools that there are available across 2 different states. I've also worked within the central office of the Education Department in Western Australia, working closely with principals in regards to finance issues and things like that. I've also had 8 years experience with Treasury and Finance and Premier and Cabinet in Western Australia, working on the development and delivery of whole of government reform. So I've had to work on implementing change and also developing policies and procedures and things like that for departments and public servants to take up. And then you add to that the fact that one of the aspects of my MBA and other studies and development I've done has been all based around leadership. I had a huge impact that started this many years ago at the beginning of my career, and it's always been a focus of everything I've done. And most recently I'm the chair of the Tasmanian Institute of Management and Leadership down there, so I have that corporate business side of leadership as well as within the school systems. So in bringing this together, from my background is that over the last century or more, education has changed so much. Its impact on school principals has been significant. Their role has become far more complex. It has had managerial, administrative, as well as instructional tasks added on to what was the traditional role. And principals are at capacity, if not over capacity, of what they can achieve and things like that. These increasing demands on their time and their work has actually been also impacted by the unexpected things that occur at schools on a day-to-day basis, be it a window broken, a toilet plugged, or some parent having a meltdown in the car park. So as well as all these other things, principals have all these extras to do. The education system globally has had significant changes in the last 30, 40 odd years. The global education reform movement has driven a lot of what countries are actually implementing as far as policy within them. Basically the 5 tenets of that are standardisation, taking a more corporate management model, focus on core subjects including literacy, numeracy and science, the use of corporate management styles, and also the standardisation testing like NAPLAN. And these have had a lot of impact on schools globally, education systems globally, and these have been predominantly driven by corporate entities and lobbyists factoring in, having an impact, bringing in global marketisation policies and things like that that are impacting on schools. And principals have never had to deal with this sort of policy previously because their whole focus has been as instructional leaders previously. So the reforms that are being driven at a state and government and federal government level are all based on these premises, and the billions of dollars that have been put into it, it's $42.5 billion has been put into schools alone, with about 87 billion including kindies, preps, and so that's a significant amount of funding that is provided by governments, and governments are now saying they want control over what is going on in schools because of how that money is being spent. So there is a greater amount of government control and lesser amount of principal autonomy. So what is being shown through the Principal and Wellbeing Survey is that all these things are impacting the health and wellbeing of school principals. You're looking at stress levels being 1.7 times higher than the general population. You're looking at sleep issues being 2.2 times greater than the general population. And yeah, these are the focus of why we've gone into this research. So the way I started out my research was actually looking at the impact of mandated reforms on the health and wellbeing of school principals. This is not where I'm at now. Through the process of the studies, it's morphed slightly, and I'll get into that as I go on. So I started off with a systematic review, and out of that came some themes, which then drove a change in the to a thematic review. And from that, there were 6 reviews, 6 themes that arose. In going in more in depth in those, I actually hit an aha moment, and that I raised that with Phil, and my focus changed. And that focus, because what came out of the lit review was that principals was showing that they were experiencing high levels of stress, but they were also showing that they were experiencing high levels of job satisfaction. And other research shows that 95% of principals say if they went back to the start of their careers to do it all over again, they would do it. And so my question was, why did this occur? Because it goes against all the organisational behaviour norms that say if you've got high job satisfaction, you've got low stress. And if you've got high stress, you've got low job satisfaction. So my question was, well, why is this different for principals? Why are they saying they're experiencing high stress, but also experiencing high job satisfaction? So that is where my focus of my study changed. So what I'm going to be focusing on is looking at how principals are experiencing job satisfaction, how they are experiencing stress, and because their role is so complex and broad, I've actually taken on aspects of the facet theory and picked the mandated reform area of their job to focus on. Because I think it would be too big to go across the whole lot, and you would actually lose what it is that I'm actually trying to find as to why. So that's where I am going to be looking at the relationship of mandated reforms in regards to how they experience their job satisfaction, their stress, and the impact it's having on their health and well-being. So my research questions changed. Instead of being simply about how they experience mandated reforms, it's turned into looking at making sense of why they're expressing high job satisfaction, high stress, as it relates to mandated reforms and their health and wellbeing. So that's where one question turned into quite a few. So I will be doing a qualitative study, and I will take a phenomenological approach. My husband can say that far better than I can, but we get there. Basically because I want to explore the lived experiences that principals are actually having. And because there are many, many phenomenological methods, research methods available, I've actually chosen a hermeneutic research approach. Basically because it doesn't have boundaries, and what I'm trying to do is to explore these lived experiences of principals. And I'm not going to just take the first bit of information I have, I'm going to create an ongoing conversation with them through feedback to actually broaden and get greater depth and explore the themes and draw them into the actual research as part of the research. They would become specific co-researchers to what it is that I'm going to do. So the reason I'm actually using all these approaches is quite open there, but the biggest things is that it's that aspect of drawing them in, it's that interaction, it's finding the stories that they have and making meaning of those stories. The hermeneutic approach looks at interpretation of the stories that are there, textual meaning, non-verbal meanings, the dialogues that they actually have, and broadening that out and doing the analysis from there. So this is why Hermeneutic actually said the focus is about illuminating details that can be seemingly we just gloss over and put aside. And this approach allows me to draw that out to get greater meaning and getting a real sense of understanding of what it is that they are saying and of their lived experiences. So interpretation is key to it, and by drawing the principals into an ongoing conversation, I can actually make sure that my interpretation is correct of what it is that they're saying. So the participants that I actually intend to use are principals across all aspects of education. So I'm going to look at primary principals, secondary principals, non-government principals as well, so I can get a balance across the two. I'm going to look at break them down into the size of school, their experience within the school, the gender of the principal, and their location, whether they're regional or remote. So I want to actually get a balanced view, and also some aspiring principals, be they deputies or head teachers or something, so that I can get the view of them of the role. But yet the whole thing is around the data, is details of their lived experience through the transcripts of interviews, one-on-one interviews, as well as focus groups. I'm going to undertake a minimum of 25 one-on-one interviews with, again, based on that location, gender, sort of school experience and that. I say a minimum because I'm hoping I will get possibly up to 50, if need be, principals who are willing to provide to that pool of data that I have. I'll also have 2 focus groups across 5 states, so that I can have primary, secondary principals talking across each state, and hopefully a further one that will be non-government principals. The beauty of that is that I can then also have a look at how each different state experiences the satisfaction and stress, and can then say, okay, so what is it about one state that is different from another too? So my progress to date, I've undertaken my review and written up the lit. I've designed the methodology that I have going to do, and I've undertaken some basic training to get to where I am at this stage. What I have to do from here is get my ethics approval, look for additional training, especially around facilitating focus groups, and also data analysis of the hermeneutic approach. I need to approach the professional association, so rather than go to each school individually, I'm going to approach each of their professional associations, the Primary Principals Association, the Secondary Principals Association, as well as the departments in each state, and drawing them in.
Let me interrupt you just for a second there. You've already got a captive audience. You should be using people who have already filled out the survey, and you shouldn't go to the organizations at all. You should go. I mean, obviously keep them in the loop because they're important stakeholders and so forth. But you should be getting your supervisor to put out a request to the thousands of principals that have filled out material, and you need to be able to link that with the two. So
we've actually already got that.
Yeah.
We asked whether they're happy to be interviewed, and they say about 90%.
And so
yes.
that should be the basis of your gathering participants. And the issue about whether, the diversity is great, but this also opens up the possibility of choosing people that you know something about because of what they said on the survey. I'm not sure whether you want to do that or not, but that's a wonderful opportunity that people normally wouldn't have when they're undertaking something like this. Yeah.
I actually had a discussion a little while ago in regards to that sort of question, and my thoughts were around, yes, to get some people who have already undertaken the survey, and the question was also around, would you have the same people in focus groups as one-to-one interviews? My thoughts were 1 or 2, yes, because that would give that link between the two groups, and also it would give an opportunity to expand on thoughts. And so yes, using the survey participants as well, but also there's the non-survey participants who are sort of a bit of a clean field in regards to those questions.
No, you don't have the scope for that. Qualitative research is never going to give you generalizability. You're not going for generalizability. You have such a finite sample. So you can't say that in general this is what we can say from the quality. So the beauty of what you've got is you can enrich upon what is on the survey where you have generalizability. There's nothing wrong with going to people who have never filled out the survey, but given that there's only so much that you can do with the interviews, I wouldn't expend
Too much effort.
the limited resources.
It's about what it will give you.
Yeah.
And I'm actually quite concerned about the number. The number is pretty high for a qualitative thesis. I mean, 50 from each state, or
No, 50 total. 25 total.
I'd like a minimum of 25.
okay.
Yeah.
Somehow I heard 15 from each state, and I just had a heart attack.
And then the focus groups on top of that, which is still ambitious.
That's still really ambitious, very ambitious.
No.
Go on.
And also you need to explore some ways of making it easier. Because I mean, the transcription of these is going to kill you. And one possibility is to farm it out, but that gets really expensive and probably isn't reasonable. Another possibility, I don't know how long these interviews are going to last. If they're going to be a couple of hours, it might be worth using some of the automatic transcription.
I was actually looking at 45 minutes to an hour for each.
Yeah.
In a past life, I actually did a lot of transcription work myself.
Yeah, so you know
So
better than I do.
that was taken into consideration in regards to the numbers, and that's why I thought 25 would be doable.
So that's 100 hours of transcription.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's all I was concerned about too.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
But you're also talking about having email groups, so that actually some of it would be written communication between you and the principals as well.
Yeah, I'd
which
like
means
to.
There's no transcription, but there's chances for
analysing
going
that.
backwards and forwards and saying, "Did you mean this? What can you expand on that?" And it all is getting I agree. Very kind of, whoa, where do we, and that's the trouble with this whole project, is it's all a bit overwhelming. There's so much of everything.
Yeah,
That how do you focus in on something that's going to answer some questions? We go towards answering questions without completely killing yourself at the same time.
Which comes down to also the questions that are going to be developed to ask in these.
Okay, we've
Yeah.
thrown you off track.
Sorry.
I'll let you go back on
No,
track. But
that's okay.
that one was so central. That was maybe one of the biggest issues that I had in reading through which was really good.
It's good.
So the importance of it is that the Principal and Health Wellbeing Survey is showing us that there are areas of concern in regards to the health and wellbeing of principals. The current trend that we are looking at is to do with education reforms and how that does impact on them. We are looking at the impact on school leaders, which has wide ramifications for the education sector going forward, when we have a large cohort that are at or near retirement age and a small cohort who are willing to step up to the role. And it's the people who are actually in the role that this can provide some relevance to, as well as the promote to the general rule. So by doing this, we can actually possibly have an impact on making change within the education system, making change that has positive impact on principals, provide an opportunity to feed into leadership styles and help student outcomes. But the wider thing is, I've recently had discussions with friends who are within the health sector, within the police sector, within the fire sector, and they're actually experiencing these same things. So this piece of research could have wider ramification across other public service areas as well. So basically my research has changed to the questions that are around lived experience of job satisfaction and stress of school principals, especially within the focus area of mandated reforms and what impact this has on their health and well-being. I'm at the start of a very significant journey for myself, and I'm really looking forward to it. It will be a qualitative approach with a hermeneutic, so I can really draw out those lived experiences. And I'm right at the beginning of this journey. But I do have to say thank you so much for Phil and Paul for their patience and their assistance in this time in getting to here and hopefully going forward. So,
Thank you. Questions? Phil?
I'll ask the Dorothy think so. Is the systematic review part of the thesis? And also, having read it, I thought the systematic review was really very strong. I thought if you could give us some details about what you did, how you did, and what you found.
well, started out with the true systematic review process that I went through with going through, cutting down the literature to those relevant. There was something like 9,000 odd pieces of literature that got cut down to around the 60 odd. And the themes came out, and then I explored the themes further from there. Yes, it will stay as part of the longer thesis, because I think what came out of that was very valuable, especially around those themes. And yeah, it drove the changing of my focus to that gap that was there.
I think that it should be a research chapter rather than a literature review. And I think that was what Phil was getting at, that the methodological rigor that you used in doing that systematic review should be a model for some of people in our institute that are doing that. And so I think it's important that that's not just sort of buried as part of a literature review. I don't mind it having a literature review in addition to that,
Yep.
but that systematic review, I would think that's a standalone chapter that is seen as a research chapter rather than a literature review leading up to.
Okay, so I'll drag that other bit that I
Yeah,
took out back in.
It's very strong, and I was very impressed with how systematic it was. Yeah. I was actually hoping that you would present that today. Some of that today, because it really was a model, and the fact that you were able to automate some of the selection criteria and things like that, I mean, that was very strong.
It was strong.
Okay, happy to do that another.
Felicia? And then-
Unfortunately, I haven't had the opportunity to read the systematic review, but one of the things you said, which is so interesting, was that in other areas of organisational behaviour, there's this different relationship between job satisfaction and stress. And I just wanted to check for my own sake. You were comparing like with like? I mean, because principals, who would you compare them with in other areas of organisational behaviour?
I took it at more of a general leadership level. The principals are an organisational leader within, so I looked at organisational leadership and compared it at that sort of general level. Though I didn't specifically look into, though I think it's Weiss has done work on the link between the workplace, the job satisfaction, stress, that I would love to explore further. But that sort of came after that was something I came after. So this is why I see it as a development that will go
And
further.
it's important to just stick to the topic.
Yes.
Because you can go,
Yeah.
yeah.
But there's many other kinds of workplaces too. I mean, in leadership, yes, absolutely. But there's different kinds of workplaces, and I don't know whether it's true in all different sorts of workplaces, that statement, or whether it only applies to some rather than others. Just interesting. Can I just ask a couple of supplementaries? One is, given that all of these principals will have experienced the educational reforms, how do you know that it's the educational reforms that are causing the problem?
Well, that's part of what I'll draw out. Because there are so many aspects of their roles, if you look at if you take like a facet theory sort of approach to it, so rather than looking at the conditions, look at the actual aspects, different aspects of the role that they do. You've got the education leader, you've got the reform leader, you've got the general administrative manager, you've got the public face. Because there are so many of those, I thought that I'd have to actually limit it in some way, otherwise it would be bigger than Ben-Hur. So by taking a look at mandated reform, because that was one of the sort of top 6 or 8 concerns that principals have expressed that cause them greater stress or greatest job satisfaction, and I can sort of narrow it and then possibly look at, is it applicable to other areas? It's a model I'm playing with.
But it's not causal though, Felicia. I think Di's approach to it is more descriptive and how have these reforms affected the principles rather than sort of arguing causality in a really strong way.
I was just struck by at the beginning you said there's so many things have changed in the education system. So, the how have they affected the principles? How do you know it's they rather than all those other things that have changed?
Well, that's the nature of the
Because you've
policy.
got
Hold on, I think there's Rich and then you.
Well, the question I have really comes back to your method. You said you were going to use a phenomenological hermeneutic approach, and that's a very open-ended description of methods. You also did a systematic review, which I assume is organizing some of the questions or heuristics you're going to bring to that. Obviously, it's not just a grounded theory approach. It doesn't sound like you're going to let this build bottom up. Even the questions you're asking are derived from some a priori notions that you have. I just want to hear a little more about how you are going to apply a phenomenological hermeneutic approach in this study.
With hermeneutical approach, the biggest thing about that is that the researcher needs to have some understanding of the environment in which the actual research is being undertaken. So I have that depth of knowledge of education and education leadership and policy development and change reform. So I can bring that into that area of having underlying basic knowledge.
So is that guiding you to ask certain questions of the principals, or is it an open-ended interview? How are you proceeding?
They will be an open-ended interview, because what I want to use is my knowledge as a base understanding of where I can draw out some information and then have them expand through the unstructured interviews that I'm going to
Well,
hold.
it's open-ended within a framework. I mean, you've got to focus on stress, you've got to focus on job satisfaction, and you've got to focus on reforms.
Yeah.
And so it's not going to be completely open-ended. It's going to be open-ended in what their experience is in relation to that.
Right, and then you ask these open-ended questions, and then from these you have to call some things through the hermeneutic approach, and that means that there's a method that you're using in order to do that calling. Have you thought about what that method is?
No, I haven't. And that's where one of my next steps is that I want to get some more training in regards to this approach.
Because there are multiple hermeneutic approaches.
Yeah.
And there are specific ones within, so I
Yeah.
think that still to be specified.
One of the concerns that I had was that, I mean, I know that your research questions are evolving, but if the focus is specifically on this interesting relationship between stress and job satisfaction, surely you have to have a research question about that. You have research questions that I saw about job satisfaction, and you had research questions about stress, but you didn't seem to have, maybe I just missed it, but you didn't seem to have research questions about how they're related from the perspective of each principle. Because that's the really fascinating one that you uncovered that you want to have as a focus.
I hadn't actually got a specific research question around that as yet, but that was the aim of what I to do, to actually find a link. Is there a link between those two, and is it in relation to certain aspects of the role?
Alicia?
You spoke about differences between different sorts of schools, and you're going to try and cover quite a broad range. As a well-being researcher, I wonder if there are also big differences in the school's approach to staff well-being, and whether that's a variable that might be of interest.
Yeah. Personal experiences said yes, it does vary from school to school. What impact that would I'm not looking at so much the schools, I'm actually looking at the individuals, the principals themselves and the role of principal. So that would, their personal belief and philosophy around that will come out somewhat in the questions asked, but I'm not intending to go further to how it relates to schools itself and staff within schools. It's keeping it within that one role.
So it is framed around this idea of the reform impact on the individual, who then will mediate that out to the rest of the school. So, yeah, it's like the hard thing with all of these things is where you draw the boundaries.
Yeah.
So that is going to be the framing around policy reform and the impacts of that going out. And then, you know, this particularly interesting sort of thing of how come with all of this that seems to be having lots of negative impact, they're saying you've got very high job satisfaction and increasing. So
I'm interested in what this presentation has made it clear for me, guys. It seems to me you're poised on a choice here to go in a direction that's potentially more mixed methods kind of approach, where you're using the surveys and you're using the qualitative data and you're answering specific questions around job satisfaction and the relationship to stress and so forth. Or the hermeneutic label suggests a much broader approach, to me at least, which might be more, you know, so it might include observation, for example, or it might include, when you talk about being a co-researcher, you know, it might include iteratively going through with the principals what you're concluding from the data, and not just using transcripts, like using videos and bodily expression and all that sort of stuff. So there's a sort of really rich pathway, and I don't mean rich in terms of good, I just mean rich in terms of multiple channels kind of pathway. And then there's another pathway which is mixed methods, I would say. You've got a golden opportunity, as I completely reiterate what Herb says, in terms of you've actually got a longitudinal history of some of these principles that could be enormously valuable that most people don't have. So for me, both of those options could be good if fleshed out properly, but right at the moment it feels to me as though it's kind of, you're not committing to one or the other. That it's sort of like you're poised a little bit. I just wondered if you've got a reflection either on whether I've misunderstood that, and also if you've got a personal preference for where you might go, if I've framed that correctly.
My personal preference is taking the hermeneutic approach. And I have looked at, had thoughts around taking it as far as videotaping the sessions as well as recording them. I also have an executive coaching background, so I had intended as part of the interviews and the focus groups to really take note of the non-verbal aspects of responses and things like that as well. The more that I have, as I said, it's the start of this journey, and I'm only a tadpole in amongst this, so I've been learning these different methodologies as I've gone along, and this one has really, possibly because of my background, that it struck as being what I would like to further go down that route.
Okay.
Just I know that you had discussed some further training as well, but conducting focus groups with that approach is quite difficult. And so maybe, like you said, maybe you'll have to look into recording or looking at some of those nonverbals, depending on how many people you have in your focus groups.
Yes.
So.
Anybody else?